Hey guys, we got a Jeep here from Colorado. It lives at high altitude and the owner was thinking about upgrading it from an LS 6.2 LS3 to a Gen 5 LT. This Jeep was built many years ago and it has zero problems, zero issues. The only thing is, when you get up at 10, 12,000 feet, it loses a lot of its performance. So the customer wants to get that back. So what we decided to do is go with a supercharger. We're going to install a supercharger on this Jeep and we're going to walk you through it. So Wendy's going to help us here. Let's get the hood open. So this is Wendy from Motec. She's been with us for a long time. In fact, the harness on this Jeep was hand built by Wendy many years ago. I'm going to say 4 or 5 years ago. She actually built these and strung them out from scratch. One of the advantages of being single. The customers had zero issues with this harness, and we're going to reuse this harness with the supercharger build. I'm going to point some things out in this engine compartment that I like and things that I don't like and what we're going to do, where we're going to go with it. So the first thing you can see is that this Jeep has the GM accessory drive. Wendy's going to show you the power steering pump. That's a factory Camaro power steering pump. What she's pointing at now is the PSC reservoir. I don't really like to mount them over there. I like to mount them over here. The thing about PSC reservoirs is they're gravity feed, and what that means is that it's basically a hopper and it's gravity feed down to the pump. If you outstrip that reservoir, then you're going to end up sucking in air and it's going to start whining. Now let's take a look at this real quick. This is the puke tube, as I call it, and you can see it's not really going anything, it just drains. PSC not long ago has offered their anti-splash valve, and what that basically does is it seals the system and allows it to hold a couple of PSI of pressure. What that does is, if you're really revving the engine up, it's hot, you're not going to suck air in because you're atmospheric. You're actually pressurizing the system just like the factory JK does, and that helps prevent a lot of issues. Now this is our early harness setup with a busman and ECM mount that's cantilevered, and it works great. This guy's had zero issues, and we're going to reuse all this in the swap. Now I will say that we are going to upgrade from the Motec module to the Mocan module. And while there's not a whole lot of need for that, we will add a little bit of extra functionality with the Prindle readout and air conditioning control. This customer is very particular about his vehicle. You can see he has Evans waterless coolant. It's basically a coolant that doesn't have any water for corrosion. We've got an Agm battery, and I want to say something about that. These batteries are very critical in the electrical system of your JK. Some of the new AGMs aren't so good, some are good. Make sure you get a good one, because I've seen these AGMs drop cells and voltage drops even though they crank your JK over fine. I've seen these AGM batteries get key off draws even when they're disconnected from the vehicle and they drain on their own. So if you get a AGM battery, just make sure it's a good one. I'm still a fan of the lead acid battery. We are considering the factory GM LSA blower, and we're also considering the Mangason. They're both TVS style roots blowers. Centrifugal blowers work, but I used to work with Joe Granatelli back at Paxton, and I think that the power output of the centrifugals is a little bit higher in the RPM band than we want in this Jeep. So we're going to go with a root style blower. So basically we're going to take this LS3 intake off, and then we're going to fit an LSA style blower, whether it's Mangason or GM Performance. And because we have the factory accessory drive on this, it shouldn't be very difficult. Now this customer has installed an Arb compressor over by the brake booster. I'm not a fan of putting electric air compressors in the engine compartment for a couple of reasons. One, it makes them run hot, and two, it takes up valuable real estate. I like mounting these in the cab somewhere. Now if you have a constant run or a high duty cycle compressor and you don't want to hear it in the cab, you can mount it in the back, or you can mount it under the hood. But if all you're using your compressor for is to air up tires when you're stopped, or ARB lockers, then put it under the seat. It's going to allow the compressor to run cooler, run longer. It's just a better deal all the way around. This customer hasn't had any problem with cooling, even at altitude. We like to run the Camaro SS fan because it's a very high performance fan. But we are going to have to fit a water to air intercooler. So that's going to come in up here. Now as you can see, this customer has a rather large transmission cooler. We are running 40s, 1 tons, hydraulics, the whole 9 yards. So this is a heavy JK. We've got a winch that's not properly sunk, and then we got a hoop that's blocking a lot of airflow. Now you might say, well, at low speed it doesn't have a lot of effect, and that's probably true because the fan's going to overcome it. But if you look at it from this angle here, I think you can see how much obstruction there is, and at 70-80 miles an hour there's not going to be much air going into this grill. So it's going to be deflected over the hood, and you're going to be running off that fan. So with the blower, we're probably going to want to sink this winch. This transmission cooler is probably a little bit oversized for a 6L80 because the 6L80 is a low friction, low heat transmission. We are going to fit an intercooler. In the last couple of builds we did, we fit in Edelbrock intercooler, and they worked well. They're water to air, and what that means is we don't have to run 3-4 inch pipes between the supercharger and the intercooler. We can run small heater hoses to the intercooler and transfer that heat through water. Guys, one of the biggest issues we run into with these swaps is all the aftermarket wiring for accessories and things. I don't even know what he has in this, but I've got guys with GPS locators and radars and cameras, and it's really important to keep all this stuff clean. And what we find is a lot of the issues that guys have with swaps, not just ours, but any swap in general, really isn't related to the swap. It's related to all the aftermarket accessories. Just recently we had a customer having some issues, and he had an alarm installed, and the alarm had cut the main ignition wire from the ignition switch, the secondary ignition wire from the ignition switch. They tapped into the CAN bus for radio controls, and it was just causing all sorts of corruption. So if you put aftermarket accessories on, don't just go nuts and get stuff you don't need. Make sure it's something you need, you want, and it's well engineered and designed. As far as the emissions go, we're going to keep all the emissions. You can see on this LS3 we relocated the purge valve over on the intake manifold or the fuel rail. We're going to drop that down with a blower, of course. Now I'm going to be doing a driving video explaining the advantage of a blower over a normally aspirated engine. And this LS3, while it's high compression, about 10.8 to 1, simply cannot make up for the low air density at high altitude. And Colorado, unfortunately, has some really long mountain grades at really high altitudes, which is a double whammy when it comes to engine performance. The LTs do deal with it better. They're 11.5 to 1 compression. But with a blower on this engine, just like aircraft, it should bring most of its performance back and not hurt drivability. When you add a camshaft to an engine, you can get more power out of it, but you're still stuck with basically a normally aspirated engine and the cylinder pressure that you get. With a blower, we can increase that cylinder pressure. In fact, you heard that saying that there's no replacement for displacement. Well, it's kind of true, but with a blower, we try to do that. We actually try to cram more air, force more air and fuel charge into the chamber. And that's what we're going to be doing with this Jeep. But we don't want to lose drivability. So the flip side to a blower is, while we can get that extra cylinder pressure, we're not going to have a camshaft with a lot of overlap or an intake valve that closes late, which then blows the air charge back into the intake and gives you that rump, 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 so your wife won't drive it to the store. So that's what we're going to do with this JK. It'll be a multi-part video series. We're going to show you how it drives before the blower swap, how it drives after the blower swap, and how it wheels, because that's really important. Having 500, 600 horsepower doesn't do you any good if the drivability goes to pot.
Alright guys, back in the day here at Motec, when I started about 2012, I would make these engine harnesses by hand. We no longer do that. For emissions and economy, we use GM factory harnesses. We use factory GM connectors, including the power distribution connector, to keep this kit plug and play.